Here we are starting part 3 of my interview with Varg Freeborn. We have covered some really good material so far. We've covered about violence, the idea that just because, it looks like the other guy, started things, there were unique aspects to the way the law actually operates. We've talked about that. We talked about what's important. We talked about how to look and train with experts. We've talked about, what violence is and what's the price for growing up with violence. How do you deal with that? All these subjects are there, and what's really important again is what I love about this is again kind of this theme that I'm trying to bring to you guys is the idea that self-defense requires a strategy, and if I can bring you subject matter experts that can add to your ability to build an effective strategy, that's what I'm going to do. Now, we left it yesterday, and I was about to make some comments on what Varg had just said, and on how to train with experts and how to prioritize how to learn what they prioritize and why that's so important. So we'll go there, and then we end on a really, really strong note on this. And again, I can't recommend that you buy his books enough. They're just both the books, Violence of the Mind and his newest one, Beyond Uda, are just really just must-haves for your library. And again, very enjoyable to read and clear to read. Again, he makes a strong point to use straight language, straight vocabulary, so that you can grasp it right away. Not that we're stupid or anything like that, but quite oftentimes people in this arena try to use terminology to make themselves look smart, which takes away from the clarity of the subject. And as he and I were both discussing, violence is too important of a subject that you understand to not maintain clarity. And with that light, let's go to third and final segment with Varg Freeborn. I tell people all the time the other litmus test they have, because I tell them probably some of the worst ways to judge, a system is through its training products, because they're gonna be stilted towards that particular thing. What I try to tell people to do is they've got a wealth of objective information out there via CCTV. There's tons of acts of violence that you can watch, and you start seeing things over and over and over again. In particular, we were talking about knife earlier. Just see how people that kill use knives. You see it. It's pretty straightforward. And then I just tell people, I go, hey, depending on what you're training for, what are your training goals? I think oftentimes people go into training and they have no real mission, they have no real goal. What is the purpose of your training? If you're training, there's nothing wrong with combat sports if that's what your goal is. If your goal is to go in and you want to compete within combat sports, that's super cool and noble and difficult. It's there's a lot of work involved in that to be a top performer in mixed martial arts world. But if you say that you're training for, you want to train for street violence, and you haven't thought out a lot of these concepts, and you don't really understand the ramifications to, using violence, and then your principles and methods aren't the most direct when it comes to delivering violence, compared to what you might be up against if you're up against these criminal elements, the assumptions I always tell people is with my customers, my people, I go, hey, we're going to assume multiple attackers. We're going to assume they're bigger, faster, and stronger. And we're going to assume they're armed. That's just your baseline, in the real world. So, getting on beyond any fantasies of things, the one-on-one duel, the dual competition, which I think most people, even in this world, still think it's going to be kind of a one-on-one face up type of a situation they're going to be dealing with. And it's almost like a fantasy, like some sort of a Hollywood type fantasy of how they look at violence and how it's going to feel and how it's going to, play out, which I think is highly, highly dangerous.
Yeah. And I have a question for you, actually. In the vein of what you just talked about, how do you specifically, in just a short kind of summarized answer, how do you counsel women in self-defense in particular?
Yeah, women. But the one thing with women that is huge, I don't think enough people say it. And I was talking to forgot who it was, and they said it really well, but it actually kind of changed the way I looked at everything. Not that I wasn't doing it kind of this way before, but basically, as guys, if we're going to teach women, we have to sit there, and the way he said it was, anything we're about to show, would it work on somebody 2.5 times our size and 3 times our strength?
Exactly.
And man, that absolutely crystal clear. That made it so easy for me. And it was a much better way of however I was saying it before. I took it from, it's just escaping me. I think it was maybe Rory Miller said that to me a while back, but it's, women experience a whole different world than men, and women have a lot of gifts that men don't have, and meaning they're far more intuitive on picking up things. The problem is oftentimes they suppress their nonverbal cues that they pick up, and getting them past that idea. And the hardest thing you have with women, I don't know if you have this experience, is they have a hard time justifying injuring somebody or hurting somebody for themselves, meaning to protect their own life. And so it's that reframing of, hey, people depend on you. People want you in their life. People, you have to really kind of reframe it with women. The easy part with women is they don't try to muscle anything. So their technique usually is way better than guys, especially I've seen it in shooting all the time. Women are great at this stuff. And I make sure they only work against male body types. That's it. Like when they come in here, I want them to work against as many different unfamiliar male body types as possible. But with women, it's if you're I don't understand people that train women in a way that ends up just scaring the crap out of them. It doesn't, I hate to use the word empower, but it doesn't really give them any useful information other than, man, that's really scary, and I really hope it never happens to me.
Yeah. Or they falsely, they build false confidence by teaching them things that won't actually work against someone 2.5 times their size and strength.
Oh, some of the stuff I see where the guys in the big robot, thing, and they're just flailing away, and they're all clapping for each other after each time. It's just like, it sickens me when I look at it. It's just like, they learned nothing. There's no useful information in that drill that they just did, other than, it's scary, and I survived it, and the instructor said I did okay. And what I find interesting with women too is they're very, if you frame it right with them, they're very open to the training. They're very open to learning injury to the human body to save themselves. You got to put it in the right context, though. And I think that's the problem. The problem is a lot of times, a lot of really good information. I tell everybody that some of the best information comes from worst parts of society. And we often throw the baby out with the bathwater, because yes, it's shown in what would be a criminal context, and we dismiss everything because we say, well, I don't want to be a criminal, so I don't want to do that. I want to learn the anti whatever. And it's like, no, violence is violence, and how you use the tool would determine, whether it was justified or whether it was illegal. But
and that's actually the guy you're training against too. The criminal is who you're training to fight.
Absolutely.
Pay attention.
Absolutely. And they're not going to hesitate to use those skill sets, against you. And I tell everybody all the time, like, there's not, like, going back to the idea of, like, from a marketing standpoint and building business, come back. I mean, I often jokingly tell my people all the time, I go, hey, the best chance I can give anybody, I mean, no matter how well I train you, best chance I can ever give you is a 50-50, and that's if, everything's on, and it's just whoever gets that first injury usually is the one that, ends up going away. But, as I tell everybody else, I walk out my door, I've got 20, 35 years of this, doing it, done it in some places. I feel fairly confident about my abilities, even my later years. They're probably not as good as they were. I catch a pipe, I go down just like everybody else. Catch a pipe to the back of the head, I go down. Violence there's no immunity in violence from a physical protection standpoint, meaning it works on everybody if it's done well. It's a great tool, and but you have to accept that it can be done to you. And I think that's the thing that's hard for people. I think people want to have some fantasy that they can learn some system. And I see this with the uninitiated with Brazilian jiu-jitsu, is that a lot of
Yeah.
them think like it's the end all be all. And
Yeah.
my experience with Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and there's nothing against it. I got a lot of great friends in it. And I'm not saying that because I truly believe that. And my kids are learning BJJ because I want them to get used to having people put hands on them. I think grappling is definitely a decent skill set to have. But the context I always heard it in was more from a military context, and it usually was around prisoner handling. And usually it's like, yeah, we're back in the sandbox. We had this one guy. We were all trying to hold him down to get him to cuff him and secure him, and we couldn't. He kept squirming away. None of us could do it. And then all of a sudden, little chief, so and so came over. He's only 150 pounds, and we have all our big guys were all on him. And man, he just spider monkeys up on this guy. Boom, gets him, and now we all got to learn this. And so it was for an application. Which, hey, good prisoner handling and all that, very, very, very effective. But they somehow thought that was the reason they had to learn it all, was for prisoner, and they thought somehow it then was going to translate into the mission when you're dynamically, using violence to, in combat, not after the combat's over and you're trying to secure people. And it was there, and it's also seductive to those guys because you can compete with you can't compete with violence is pretty binary. If you're successful using violence, then you're going to do real injury to the human body, and it's not there. Whereas you can do jujitsu, quote unquote, at full speed and survive it, and then you can also have a hierarchy of who's good and who's bad and all those things, which is appealing, especially to young males.
It is. And this is probably the hardest thing for me to explain in terms of violence, because I've experienced a tremendous amount of it and lived in very violent worlds for extended periods of time. And there's a nonchalant attitude about it that is effective. And then there's an aggressive attitude about it that's ineffective. And I think the aggressive attitude about it that's ineffective comes from the being lulled into thinking that you have achieved this talismanic protection level of knowledge where you now are hard to kill. And when you've been in environments where stealth and things are done in a very covert way to try to get, and I explained this in Beyond Uda, the pinnacle of predatory behavior is to be able to prey upon another predator who's aware, or prey upon a prey that's hyper aware. That's the peak achievement of predator skill, is to be anybody can, any lion can sneak up on a sleeping baby deer, right? Like, but to be able to get close to an animal that's hyper aware and is waiting and expects you to show up, that's a higher level of skill, right?
Yeah.
And I think people lack that understanding. They consider criminals to be dumb and can't fight. And a lot of cops make this mistake, and I've counseled them on this. I'm like, listen, you think that because 90% of the guys you encountered are the lowest common denominator, drunk assholes with drug problems and alcohol problems that don't train, they're not tough. They can't manage their own problems. They're having domestic issues. They're idiots. And you're picking them up. They try to fight you and you easily subdue them. And you think, the problem is you haven't run across that guy yet. But those guys are out there, right? And they're not idiots, and they can fight, and they will kill you, and they'll employ stealth, and they'll employ timing and concealment and misleading, deception. And that's why I talk about in Beyond Uda, I go deep into those subjects, especially in the third section of the book, operating outward, how you affect perception management, how you manage the perception of people around you. That's more important than violence. Understanding how your perception is being managed is extremely important in violence, right? Like, these are the more important things. And as you say, like, people think of this like one-on-one high noon scenario that's going to happen someday, where and it's way more manipulation and deception involved. There's way more even during the fight, concealment and deception involved, right? And I teach people, especially women, to utilize these equalizers, and the things that you have that you can manipulate the perception or subvert the perception of someone. Like those are the highest predatory skills that you can achieve. And
Right.
the way you achieve that is through working on that specifically. But I think that the industry teaches, it's kind of like we're old enough to remember the, you know, in 1980s, you'd get done watching a Chuck Norris movie and you'd go outside and you'd hear some kids in the neighborhood going, yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like everybody wanted to go sign up to the karate dojo the next day, right? So
Yeah.
Monday everybody'd show up because the new Chuck Norris movie released. And so like it was the McDojo, era of
Yeah.
things. And so you get into this kata based training world where you rehearse things so well and you have now you're deadlifting and you're doing jujitsu and you're shooting guns and now you think you're impervious. But the problem is you don't understand manipulation, you don't understand deception, you don't understand concealment at a high level, and so you're very unprepared. And all of these big preparations that you're doing are very easy to subvert, very easy.
Well, you made a really
And
good
it only
point
like
that I haven't heard I hadn't heard anybody else put it out there. I used to always tell people, like, they'd ask me, well, how come you don't have more merchandise? Why don't you have more like t-shirts that say, your stuff, or any of the things that you say, like, um, and it stems back to the old days, man, where basically you wore a karate t-shirt, you wore, your boxing t-shirt or anything like that. It was just, in the neighborhoods that I grew up, especially, military bases aren't the best neighborhoods and stuff. That was just you just sending a red flag out to the local thugs, just like, oh, really? Okay, we'll wait for you. And
challenge.
yeah, it's just asking. And you did it. You took it to the next level, which I hadn't really thought of it this way, but you're absolutely right, man. The social media stuff where everybody's, I just got my blue belt, I got my blue belt in jujitsu and I'm doing this all the time. And here are all my guns. And we're just freely giving away all this information. And, my wife's a deputy chief here now and at Metro. I mean, she spent years on the streets and stuff and doing all this stuff. And she goes, God, she goes, I can't, she goes, we can't believe what we can get from social media. They willingly put up all this stuff now. They're tracking that way. But same thing with us. I mean, I don't put up, I rarely put up anything about my family. I rarely put up anything about me personally. I'm very careful. I have a couple of different businesses that I'll put some stuff up on right away. But these people that literally live their lives on social media and track your ability to track them, I thought that was an excellent point that you put out, because people don't understand the criminal mindset and the way they'll look at it and go, oh, okay, that's what you think you are? Great. Thanks for
Yeah.
the challenge and thanks for the info.
Yeah. And another point about that too is, like I remember one instance in particular where someone, and I don't get into debates on the internet at all. Like I could care less. So you will very rarely, if ever, see me arguing or debating with someone online. Like I just don't have time for that. But there was an instance where someone criticized my take on knives and legal self defense, and they said it was anecdotal and I was misleading people and things. And then I went to their profile to just look over their Instagram, and there's like all these pictures of knives and all these hashtags like murdery things and like all this
Yeah.
stuff, and they're deadlifting 400 pounds and they're doing jujitsu. I'm like, man, if you ever stab anybody in self-defense, if that like that you understand how big of a burden you're going to have to show a disparity of force, because your whole social media presence is just you showing that you have a disparity of force against the rest of the world. Like you're the strongest, fastest, killingest, you got the killingest knives, you got the biggest deadlift, you got the best jujitsu. You go to court of prosecution, be like, wow, you're a pretty dangerous guy, huh? Like you
Yeah.
you focus on being dangerous, like because you want to hurt people, right? Like, and so that's my thing is, I'm very docile on social media too, which is hard. It's hard because I just want to be vicious. I just want to,
Yeah.
like I want to
Takes a lot of
call her.
self-control.
Oh my gosh, yes. So, but I'm like, I don't show my family like you. I don't show a lot of my family and stuff like that. It's mostly motorcycles and stuff I'm doing,
Right.
but I try to keep a presence just because of, I kind of make my living
Well, yeah, you
through,
have to, but
like, yeah,
but you're
you
very
have
aware
to.
of what you're putting up there. Like
But not being gimmicky and not being a trinket salesman and not getting into like, you know, trying to create hero worship or create method worship so that you make a bunch of money. I it'd be nice to make that kind of money like that brings, but also I think that there's a lack of integrity and there's not longevity in that, right? Like I
no,
don't think you have real longevity because you're super enticing for the menu today, but then you're irrelevant tomorrow.
yeah. As soon as a new one comes along, they're off running off with that person,
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
that's kind of last thing I wanted to cover with you on that. Where do you see the industry today? Like I see the world itself right now, especially here in the U.S. I just see young men really have very few avenues to look for mentors, look for anywhere, and that's where we're seeing this proliferation of a lot of the guys that we're seeing on. And some good, some are great, very good, ethical guys, and good. And the other ones are, they're hucksters or they're, they are really into like the hero worshiping thing, which isn't necessarily good nor bad. But in the industry of self protection, self defense, I just see this. I don't know. It's just it's at a very strange place. Social media has made it a very strange arena because a lot of you realize like a lot of times the truth isn't very visually appealing, and visual appealment is really what social media is all about, and that's kind of what gets the word across. But you're in a world now where you're specializing where you want to train. You're writing very clearly, really directly. I think people really respond to that. Yeah, maybe it's not going to be the massive crowd that you'd get if you wrote a more friendly book or a more open book. But after all your experiences, your life skills, you're at a great age right now where you have that enough experience behind you, and you also perspective that you can really start offering. I mean, the books alone prove that. Where do you see things right now?
You know, honestly, I mean, I'm in a position right now where I had to take a break. I didn't teach at all uh in this year at all so far. I'm gonna do one course in Utah over a weekend here coming up in the beginning of September, and that'll be the only course I teach all year because I had to step away because I've become like burned out on the attitudes and the debauchery that I see going on in the industry. I think there's an explosion because of social media. There's an explosion of the industry, and it's like just grew to these proportions that we never imagined it would be. Now, being someone who remembers even say the 90s, when you couldn't find violence training of any kind of quality anywhere,
Yeah,
especially firearms level stuff. Like now, you can any weekend on any core quadrant of the United States, continental United States, you can find a class that's taught by some high level person that
right.
you're going to pick up something really well from. That wasn't it's proliferated in grown in ways that is unimaginable just a few years ago. That's good. Arming and training and raising the capabilities of Americans, men, women, civilians, law enforcement. This is all good stuff. So that's happening. But there's a side of it that I don't like that's developed. And I think it's the side that has to do more with social media feeding the egos. And it's the whole like designer suits, designer shoes, fancy cigars, fancy
Right.
bourbons, and all this stuff. And to be an impeccable man, you got to have this and that. And as a warriors, I think that we're missing, it's all the flashy stuff. And I think we're missing the core components of understanding human nature is not, it doesn't stop at just the violence part of it. Understanding human nature and developing yourself is a practice that's going to spill off into all the aspects of your life. And self development is more than just a fancy pressed shirt and a high end glass of bourbon, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't make you sophisticated. It may make you have the image of being sophisticated, but you're not sophisticated, right? Alone by those things. So, not being one dimensional, developing yourself in multiple ways in your life and growing in knowledge that's beyond just hurting people. And people ask, I get a message the other day from a female that asked me if I teach, knife fighting. And I know what she was looking for. And she's, looking for ways to use a knife for self defense. And I told her, yes, I do in special circumstances, but not on a wide basis because I don't have, as my good friend in Costa Rica put it, I don't have an interest in making aggressive men more dangerous and more, more aggressive and making money off of it. Like that's
Yeah.
not my objective. I want to
Yeah.
help good people be safer, live safer lives, live more confident lives, but also become better human beings throughout the process, like become stronger, not just in, when I used to run my gym, my guys come to me and say, hey, uh, when I first started here, I was messed up and, I had the anger issues. I had this going on, I had that going on. And now, after 6, 7 months, my wife kisses me when I come home. My kids can't wait to jump in my arms. It wasn't like that before. You've helped me be a better man, understand, my self-control extends beyond the gym and beyond the range, right? Like I need
Yes.
self-control when I'm dealing with my wife. I need self-control when I'm dealing with my kids. Like, so these things, they grow outward. And I think the industry I think we need to focus more on those things and not so much bourbon and fancy clothes and, fast shooting and swishy swashy, like martial arts stuff, right?
Yeah.
A little more substance, a little less flash, I think is where I'd like to see it go. But I think we have a little bit too much flash right now, honestly.
Yeah. And that's why I really wanted to have you on because I'm gonna do everything I can to push, both of your books.
Mm,
The latest one obviously it's fantastic, but it's going to be one of the books for sure when I meet people and they ask me, go, hey, what's one of the, it'll be one that I'll gift a lot.
yeah, that's
And
great.
you made it very accessible to new people, and I think it cuts through a lot of the fantasies that can get people in trouble. And I just love works like that. And you did it in a very straightforward manner. And you did it. What's interesting about it too was even though it was about you and a lot of it, it wasn't about you. It was about the concepts and the present. And that's really, as a writer, that's a really difficult thing to do. And you really
Yes.
pulled it off.
Thanks.
Um, because it doesn't read like a biography or autobiography or anything like, or the story of me. It's just like, hey, here's useful information. This is how I learned it. And here's if you take this journey with me, by the end of it, you're going to be a lot better off. And I get that. Like you really care about the result that the reader gets. And it's just I appreciate it because I know how hard that is to do. And just excellent job, man. Listen, I hope this is going to be one of many conversations that we have. There's a whole bunch of other
Mm.
stuff I'd love to go over, but I think this is a good place for us to stop the conversation as is right now and get those books sold because everything's up on Amazon now, so it's ready to go. And I will be making sure that everybody has all the links that they need to get your book, and then any ways for people to contact you. But just out of curiosity, you said you're getting back into training right now and stuff. When you do train, who's your ideal client? Like who would be somebody that what would you want them? Is there a base level of training you want them to have ahead of time, or is there a certain attitude you're looking for? Who do you prefer to train these days? Other than obviously the obvious are military, law enforcement. That's a different animal, but from a civilian perspective.
I enjoy working with people who are ready to learn and don't necessarily have a ton of experience or a ton of training already. Relative beginners, I'm okay with. I'm one of the few guys at the time into the game that I have in that's still willing to work with because a lot of kids get a lot of time in and then they just want to work with the training groupie, the guys that are already
Right.
tuned up and you don't have to spend a lot of time with. And so the classes are a lot of fun for them because they're just basically hanging out and then they get drunk at night and then the next day they hang out some more and shoot a bunch of guns or, do a bunch of submissions. And I'm not into that training groupie type of routine. I like new people coming in, especially force on force. I'm one of the few force on force instructors that invite people in that, you know, you've had your basic concealed carry, you have a concealed carry license, you come in and you've had maybe a basic handgun course and you understand basic handgun safety. And then I throw you into like a fire hose learning situation where you're just drinking from the fire hose. And what I like about it is that, yeah, I'm going to shock your system, you know, but you're going to leave there understanding something very valuable very early in your learning process. And that's going to be how to begin to prioritize what's important in training, right? So you don't go on and spend a bunch of money and a bunch of time learning a bunch of things that's not really going to apply. You're going to look at situations that I put you in, whether it's home invasion situations or being out in public in a office building or somewhere where an active shooter breaks out, or like the multiple things that I put people through, and introduce you know, fellow shooters that are unknown in the building, or bring in police officers, because I have cops that work for me that will come in their police, you know, do their procedures entering a building when there's been a shooting or something. You have to deal with that. Like enlightening people to those things doesn't require prior experience, right? You just need to be exposed to those. So I like average people. I like people who are just trying to find ways to make them and their families safer. And I don't really like the training groupies who've been to 75 classes and you want to just take another one to just check the box, or you know, you repeating taking classes and you're trying to get that, you know, at eighth of a second faster on your draw. Like, I'm not your guy, right?
Right.
I'm not your guy. Like, I'm trying to bring experiential orientation based knowledge to people to help them be safer where they're at. And my greatest reward happens to be working with people that are just struggling to try to get the basics down, and then introducing them to a level of basics that they're not really going to find anywhere else, I think. So that's what I'm looking for in terms of students for the most part.
Yeah, you know, you described in, I think it was in Beyond Uda, you're walking through the range, and everything that was going through the mind at that time, you know, and how people don't think about that. They stay in that square range and they feel really good about their performance there. But the way they're actually going to use that tool, walking through their own home or walking through that, there's so many more things to consider. And you talk about how you see these guys that are great shooters on the range, but as soon as they have to start making decisions, they get overwhelmed and they just shut down. And people don't understand that. And with all the new gun owners that we have now, you know, that just, I mean, yes, I'm in the industry. I have you know, we have a manufacturer's license. We do this, but man, there's nothing scarier than having people that I've known for over 20 years who've never owned a firearm call me up in the last year, desperately wanting firearms. And I know the vast majority of them wanted the firearm, but none of them have trained. I bet a lot of them probably haven't even taken it out of the box. And to me, that's just scary. And I think you bring in very quickly into the process something besides, you know, punch and paper targets. You're really getting inside them to let them think, hey, this is how you're going to use this tool, and you got to get used to thinking this way. And you don't have to be perfect the first time through. You just have to be acknowledged that, oh, okay. And your idea of slowing down velocity so that you can go at a rate where you can consciously, you know, start observing all of this and moving. I mean, I just don't hear enough people talk like that. They always, you know, they just overload them. They do, you know, quote unquote scenario based training and scare the crap out of people without laying down a foundation. And I really like that description that you had put through.
Yeah, learning objectives are important. You have to have every scenario based thing, or every pressure that you put a student under has to have a learning objective. And understanding human nature is how you develop those objectives for these students, and understanding patterns. After years of being in, you know, force on force situations, you see patterns emerge that are very common. People make common mistakes, and then you start to design learning objectives around those, and then tailor it to the students that are in front of you at every class. And I think that it's not that hard to do. It's very taxing. When I get done, I'm wiped out.
Yeah.
My brain is going non-stop, you know. But it's rewarding because, you know, I go in and I do my job 110%, and I'm able to change things on the fly for particular students if I see them orienting in a different way, I'm able to adjust things to give them what they need in that moment. But it takes a lot of observation and a lot of thought for me to be able to really see that happening in real time and adjust things for them so they get the maximum learning experience from it. So it's not a cookie cutter thing, and you can't do it that way and just have like, here's what I'm gonna do. This is how it's gonna go down. Let's do it day one, right? Like it
Right.
doesn't happen that way. You got to adjust it on the fly for these people.
You're dealing with
But when you
humans.
see it, exactly, because it's the same. And I explain to them in a fight, you have to think this way in a fight too. You can't go into a fight with a choreographed move and think everything's gonna be a certain way. Like you have to adjust on the fly there as
Right.
well. So that's everything we do, from training to instructing to learning and scenario based playouts. It's all adjusting on the fly based on what you're seeing happening, unfolding in front of you at the moment, and you weigh that against your current knowledge, your current experience, and then you make the best decision you can based on your value system and your, you know, everything down to your genetics is influencing how you're going to decide and respond, right? You talk about women not being able to respond in certain ways typically, and I find that to be true as well. And that's genetic based, and that's also cultural based. So there's cultural issues there, there's genetic issues there, and understanding those, that's how you do it. And my biggest advice to people, if you really want to learn how to push yourself over the edge in terms of orientation and understanding preparation to deal with criminal violence, study and spend time with other cultures and understand other cultures, and not just, don't just stay inside your homogenous, box. Go outside of that and learn about, like, what are the value systems and the traditions and the main principles that are important to people of other cultures, not just different ethnicities and nationalities, but rural people learn more about urban people learn more about rural people. Study the criminal element, watch the shows, Death Row on Netflix, or The Criminal Speaks, or listen to these things, but try to listen for cultural cues.
Right.
Understand, what makes the culture, like what makes the decision making process the way it is for these people, and you'll find out it's the same for you as it is for them. They're not monsters that have a different thought process. They have an orientation, they have fears, they have confidence. They have a value system. It's on a sliding scale. You'll find out you need to put your value system on a sliding scale, especially the valuation of human life. If you cannot put valuation of human life on a sliding scale, you will not effectively make the decision to defend yourself in a lethal force event, because you can't decide to devalue this person's life enough to inflict potentially lethal harm on them, and then you have a problem, right? So you have to not be able to see every human life as precious, because the guy trying to kill you or rape you needs to be knocked down a couple notches so that you can put holes in that guy or whatever it is you need to do to get yourself out of the situation. So you see the similarities, you find that out. And I think in terms of training, I think that's what it really comes down to, is the mental game of it.
Dude, that is awesome. And I mean, people just need to hear that last 10 minutes that we just did, because that's absolutely critical. And I urge, I hope everybody takes advantage of, making sure they, minimum read your books, but also if they get a chance to train with you, that's just an excellent. If everybody could go through an experience like that and come away with that type of a concept of
Mhm.
how to look at the rest of human nature and how to learn, I think we'd have a hell of a lot less problems right now. I think we'd have a lot less of this social media triggering that you see going on. Um, but hey, listen, I can't thank you enough for your time, and all the best with the new book. And we will definitely be pushing it here. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks for having me on. It was great.
Listen, the whole segment was good, but did you understand what we meant about that last 10 minutes? That's really what this is all about when it's putting your self-defense strategy together. I mean, I thought he just did a very just a stellar job of making you think about what's important. And again, that's why I was really looking forward to have him on. I appreciate his writings. I look forward to hopefully meeting him in the near future. And any questions that you have for him, he's been generous enough to offer to answer any of your questions that you might have as a result of this three-part interview. But again, folks, if you really want to show support for him, go buy his books, especially his latest one, Beyond Uda, just came out. Let him know how much you like the book, and support. He is a voice that needs to be heard more. And I was really, really enjoyed bringing him to you. So, folks, again, before we finish up, just remember, go to timlarkin.com, get yourself a free masterclass. All you need to do is give us your email, and the concepts that you hear in these interviews, if you like them, there's more of it there that we put it out. Again, it's YouTube, so we have to be careful how we put information out. We have to kind of self-censor at times. On the email masterclass, you get it straightforward. Also, please support this channel. Please subscribe. Please make sure you tell your friends about it. Send them a link to a video that you really liked and ask them to subscribe. That's how we're growing. That's how we're becoming the fastest growing self-protection station on YouTube, channel on YouTube. It's crazy how fast we're growing. And it's all because of you guys. So thank you very much. And until next time, all the best.